Welcome back to a special mini pod of the It's Personal podcast. I'm Christopher Adamson, one half of Adamson Ahdoot, joined today with Daniel Stefanic, former criminal defense attorney, public defender turned civil personal injury litigator now, right? Made the recent transition. And today we want to talk a little bit about fear, anxiety, the legal profession, coping mechanisms, some healthy, some unhealthy, that people have in the legal profession and outside of the legal profession. So this might be a little bit more sobering conversation, no pun intended. Right? We're back with another episode of the It's Personal podcast. I'm Christopher Adamson.
This is personal injury. It is personal.
Dan, let's just talk a little bit about your background. You started off in criminal defense. Now you're a plaintiff, personal injury litigator. Just kind of in a quick Cliff Notes version, how did that come about?
Well, how did the entire career come about, or how did change the switch?
How did your entire career come about? What was the impetus for you to become an attorney? And then what prompted you to make the switch, just in a quick nutshell?
So I think that that's kind of one of the things we're talking about today is, I didn't start law. I didn't even go to college really until I was 35 or 36 years old. And so I started much later in life. I had always wanted to pursue law, ended up taking other paths that we'll talk about later. And then, later on, when I was 35, 36 years old, I finally decided, look, this is something that I have to do. I'm not going to ever be happy with myself in life unless I try to tackle this challenge, face my fears, go do the things I needed to do to get here. And, I've talked before about then along the way getting to that point, I had some interaction with the criminal justice system and with public defenders, and decided that was something that I wanted to pursue in my legal career and kind of give back to the underprivileged community and give back to the people who had helped me out at certain points. And I did that for a while. I got some trial experience. I'd always wanted to be a trial attorney, and being a public defender is a heavy task. And honestly, I think I wanted to do something that wasn't grating on my soul quite as much, and where I still felt like I could really be a service to people that needed my help and assistance, and also an opportunity to kind of pursue standing up to the government or government agencies in another way. And that's how I landed here by the grace of God, I guess, really.
Yeah. Did you feel like from a young age you had to succeed or become a success?
It's funny. I did not feel that way. In fact, it was the exact opposite. I grew up in a very dysfunctional household, very abusive household. And my father was somewhat of a genius, really. But he was, I have nothing really great to say about him other than he was very smart. And throughout my childhood, I was basically told, I was never going to be good enough, and I would I would be a janitor for the rest of my life. And, I was really kind of a waste of everybody's time. So I had this dream of what I wanted to do, but I didn't actually ever believe it was possible or believe that I could actually, accomplish those things. And in fact, when I thought to myself, look, I want to do those things, I got too scared. Really, I think first of proving my father right. Mm-hmm. And secondly, scared of the idea that maybe he was right. Maybe I was stupid and I wasn't good enough to do the things that I dreamed of being able to do. And so I think that kind of held me up for quite some time. But it was always something it was always, to me, that dream, like, kids dream of going to the Olympics, being a professional boxer, being an actor. It was one of those dreams to me. Like, sure, everybody has a dream that they know they're probably not going to accomplish, and that's what it was to me, really.
When you thought about being a trial attorney, you said you had some fear around that. Is that right?
A ton of fear, and I think, like I said, I started, law school later when I was 36 years old. But when you look back at my school history, for almost 20 years, I had consistently gone to school and signed up for classes at community college. And I think that I thought I had to meet an expectation of perfection. And so I would go to class and I would take in the knowledge. I would do the best I can. And then it would come time for that first test. And I would think that I was going to get something wrong on the test. I wasn't going to get 100%. And I would actually drop out of the class, or I just would stop going. In fact, I had a couple of F's on my background when I finally did go through with college that really affected my GPA. But that fear started then. I was scared of life for almost my whole entire life, and scared of failure, and scared of not being perfect, scared of being less than, scared of other people being better than me. And all of those same fears still play out to this day with being a trial attorney and wanting to be a trial attorney. Mm-hmm. I've just learned how to manage the fear better and how to overcome the fear today, which are skills that I didn't have for many years.
So I think we'll kind of come back a little bit later and circle back to your coping mechanisms. But you mentioned starting law school later in life. I think, like, for me, for example, I went to high school. After high school, went straight to college for 4 years. After college, went straight to law school for 3 years. And then I was an attorney. So it was a very linear path. I think your path is a little bit more convoluted, right?
I think that is fair that is very fair to say. And, out of high school, I actually fell into a career in snow sports design and the snow sport industry just by accident. It turned out that I was skilled at math and had math skills beyond what I guess the average person has, and was talking to someone in a snowboard shop one day, and they happened to be looking for someone to help them with a specific design. And I was able to kind of apply an equation and say, here's what you're looking for. And I kind of just fell into this industry for a while. And I did that for a while, and it was good money. And then I kind of fell off. That's when, by that point, I was already drinking pretty heavily and drugging. I would put anything in my body that I could get my hands on, and because I was a miserable person, right? And you kind of start self-medicating a little bit, and you need a little, and it goes a long way. But then as you're going along down that path, you need a lot more, and it goes a much shorter distance, right? And so at some point, you're just high and drunk all day, every day, and of course that doesn't work very well for a career. And so, to make a long story short, I ended up homeless. I had made a really good living, a really good career, had a good amount of money. And fast forward 5 years, I was homeless on the side of the freeway begging for money. I was literally taking a bath in a Starbucks bathroom in the morning, stealing some liquor from the grocery store to get through the day, shaking so bad I couldn't even begin my day, and kind of on the side of the road, just really wishing I would die. And then getting enough liquor in me to kind of forget that I was wishing I would die. Mm-hmm. And it was a mess. It was truly a mess. And a lot of that, I suffered a lot of loss in my life, loss of family members and really close friends as I was going along. And I think some of that played into it, but a lot of it was just fear-based. It was just fear. It was just wanting so badly to do new things with my life and being scared to try to do them, right? And the way to cover that up is kind of actually make an excuse for yourself that I'm too drunk and high to be able to do those things. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of that. And then one day literally one day told another homeless person that kind of stayed with me in the bushes or whatever. And it's not whatever. It was the bushes by the side of the freeway where they've now built a train through. Yeah. And I told this guy, I said, and I had these 2 dogs. I collected up all this Valium and Xanax and, pills. And I told him, dude, look, I need to, I can't do this anymore. Yeah. And so the option was kind of like take all the pills and give the pills to the dogs or figure out a different way. Right. And this guy told me of a government-funded rehab that he had been to. And he's like, if you just go there and show up at the door, they'll let you in. Mm-hmm. and I didn't know what I was going to do with my dogs. And these guys actually took care of my dogs for a whole year while I was in rehab. For me, I went to that.
The guys on the street?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I went to the rehab facility and they let me in. My life changed. That was the day my life changed. I finally had found these people that would just give me a place where I couldn't get any alcohol. By that point I kind of quit everything else, but I couldn't stop drinking. Mm-hmm. Right. And, I got through a month of that and realized, okay, I can do this. And then, it was on, they told me I could stay for a year. And I was at that point convinced myself, like, I cannot go back to that way of living. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, decided, look, I got to go sign up for school and I got to make myself go to the classes. And I got to make myself go to the tests. Mm-hmm. And even if I fail the test, I got to put all the time in and try to get the 100%. But if I don't get 100%, I'm going to have to accept that from myself mm-hmm. and learn how to live through failure. Right. And that was kind of the beginning of the road for going down this path.
So you kind of mentioned that you had a conversation with this other guy, like in the bushes that one day, but what do you think was really the impetus for you to seriously say to yourself, I just can't do this anymore? Because I've had that moment myself, which I'll get into in a minute, but I'm curious what that was for you.
I mean, I think that, everybody talks about rock bottom, right? And I think it was a dark place for me. I'm basically have had one outfit that I've been wearing for a month and, waiting to find some more clothes in the alley or whatever. I've shit myself. I've thrown up on myself. I've had the ambulance come get me because people found me passed out on the side of the road. And it's just one thing after the other. And then the point I had gotten to where I was waking up in the morning and literally needing help from someone to drink because I was shaking so bad that I couldn't hold the drink. And I just had given up, I'd given up. And I think I got to that point where I only had two options. It was either die or turn it around. Right. And I remember thinking to myself, I have so much potential, right? And what am I doing? Why is this happening to me? And mm-hmm. what am I doing? And then when I thought to myself, why is this happening to me? I remember thinking to myself, it's because I'm doing it to myself, right? Yeah. And that I had to take the steps and undo it. And that was it. That was kind of it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, my issue was I stopped drinking in 2010. So most people who know me or close friends, whatever, they know that I don't drink. And I stopped in 2010 because my story is basically when I went to UCLA, that kind of set the tone for my relationship with alcohol. Because before that, in high school, I never really drank, never really did anything. And then when I got to college, I was only an hour away from my parents' house, basically at UCLA. But it was just the first time I lived away from home, I had a bunch of freedom. And literally, I remember the weekend that I moved in, the dorm room that I was sharing with two other people because I was in the Saxon Suites at UCLA. So it was a 6-person suite. So there were 2 rooms, 3 people in each room. And so one of my suite mates in my room, literally when I got there, the weekend I moved in, he opens the door to his closet. On the floor of his closet is just literally a wet bar. It's 10 bottles of alcohol, And so I remember we have a party that same weekend. Everybody's getting shit-faced, including me. And, at one point I'm crawling to the toilet. I'm throwing up. I crawl into bed. And I remember, I didn't even know it, but I later found out that there was some random girl who came to the party that stayed up at my bedside because he was worried that I was going to throw up in my sleep and choke on my own vomit, And so for me, that kind of set the tone for my relationship to alcohol, in terms of just very heavy binge drinking that was in 98, my first year at UCLA, through when I stopped drinking in 2010. And so because it's just especially at a school like UCLA, I think at any major institution, there's a pretty heavy drinking culture. And that's not to disparage the school or anything like that, but I think it's just one of those things where college kids going to a major college university, and like it's just kind of ingrained that that's part of the college experience. And so I remember, like, I was going to bars multiple nights a week and just doing just a lot of heavy binge drinking. So it wasn't necessarily like every day back to back to back to back, but it was just when I would go out, I couldn't really control like how much I was going to drink in any circumstance where I was drinking. And so that progressed like past undergrad, through law school, through when I'm out in the world, just trying to, hold down a job and et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, it wasn't necessarily like, I think a lot of people, when they think of like alcoholics, it's like Barney on The Simpsons, and you're like sleeping in front of the liquor store and stuff like that. Like for me, it wasn't like that, but it was for like when I would drink, I just wouldn't really have any control over it. Blacking out, I've thrown up on occasion, stuff like that. Like, in 2005, I crashed my car driving drunk in a blackout. And luckily, it was a parked car on the side of the road, so nobody else got injured other than me. But, I think about that oftentimes in the present day, because it's like a few more inches to the right, could have been a head-on collision, and I could not be here, or I could have injured or killed somebody else, so by the grace of God, none of that ever happened. But it's like that happened in 2005, and I still didn't stop drinking until 2010, because it was always like things might happen, and then I'd say, okay, I'm going to stop. And then I might stop for like a month or a couple months or something like that. And then I would just kind of fall back into those same patterns. And for me, it was more so like, I used it as a crutch because I was really, really shy. I was very introverted. And so for me, I thought it was like making me, less introverted, like making me more outgoing, making me happier, making me funnier, making things more exciting, etc. And, eventually I just kind of had an epiphany that was all a mirage, like it wasn't true. And what happened was, like in a nutshell, I went to Vegas in September 2010 for, a seminar, conference. And it was one of those things where I flew there. So I got on the plane on the Thursday. I was like drinking on the plane. As soon as we touched down, I'm drinking all day. And then a group of us went out at night, that same night on Thursday, but we went out at like midnight, and I had been drinking all day. And then I was drinking at the till, like we had a table, and I took a couple sips, from a bottle, and just basically it was like a light switch. And I was just like, and I have no memory of this happening. Like people had to tell me afterwards and fill me in, but essentially I was just like non-responsive. And then security comes to the table, talks to my friends. He's like, you guys got to get this guy out of here. So like, long story short, the next day, like I had good friends around me who helped me get home. And then the next day I woke up on the floor in my bathroom, and I had no memory of what had happened, like the day before, really the night before. But I just knew, like in my body, that it had just, like, it hadn't been a good night, and I literally felt like the lowest I had ever felt in life. And I peeled myself off the floor. I took a shower, and like literally, like the clothes that I was wearing, like I never wanted to see them again. So I threw them away. And then I just stayed in bed for like the next 2 days straight with the curtains drawn, didn't watch TV, didn't do anything. And it was like during that time that I just had an epiphany, like I can't do this anymore. And my epiphany was also that all of the things, like the quote unquote positive things I thought alcohol had been doing for me, like making me happier, making me funnier, making me more outgoing, etc., it was just all a mirage. And like that night, and then when I woke up the next day, I had like pierced the veil, and like it kind of just like removed this veil from my eyes, and like I just saw things for what they really were. And I was just like, this is only ever, like alcohol has only ever done negative things to me and for me. And I had this literally, like, had an epiphany, like I have to stop doing this to myself. Like I can't do this anymore. So then I went home, and when I went home, I bought a physical calendar. I hung it on my wall, and I resolved, like, every single day I'm just going to set a firm resolution not to have a drink. Like I never said I'm never going to drink again, because I had tried that in the past, and it just felt like that was like not necessarily like a lofty ambition, but I just said I have to like just make this a specific intention every single day. And so I bought a calendar, I hung it on the wall in front of my bed. And then every night when I would get home, when I didn't have a drink, I put an X on the calendar. So then when I woke up in the morning and sat up in bed, it would be the first thing that I would see. So I started having this visual representation of all these days accruing. And it got to the point where I felt like if I looked at that calendar and I saw a blank square, I missed all the black squares, like I would hate myself, which, that's being a little bit hyperbolic, but I knew I would hate myself. And so that became like a driving factor and a driving motivation to me as well. But like that experience that I had in Vegas, that was just really the tip of the iceberg. But for me, it really was kind of my rock bottom, because I woke up on the floor of my bathroom, like not even in my bed. So it was literally like rock bottom. I'm peeling myself up off the floor, taking a shower and saying, I have to make a change. So like, I'm grateful for that. Like all the experiences that I had, I'm grateful for, because I think it took all those experiences accruing to get to that point and that day in September. So that night was September 2nd. And then the next day when I woke up, that was September 3rd, 2010. Like all those experiences that I had building up to that point and accruing to that point, like that night was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. And I just literally had that aha moment. And luckily for me, it was powerful enough for me to sustain it for at least a long enough amount of time that I kind of got over that hump of those other fits and starts I had had in the past when I told myself I need to stop drinking. And then now it's gotten to the point where, again, like now we're in 2025, there's people that I've met in life that only know me as like not drinking, like there's people that have, they know, they know the old Chris, like Alan included, my business partner, law partner, like they know the quote unquote old Chris. But I think even those people that know that old Chris would say like, I'm leaps and bounds better now than I was then. But that was a necessary antecedent to me getting to this point, because I don't think I might not be sitting here, period, like if I had continued, but I definitely wouldn't be sitting here the same version of myself that's having this conversation with you if I hadn't stopped.
Right. And I agree with what you said, that all of those experiences, I think, are what have allowed me to like maintain my sobriety and to tackle challenges the way that I do now. And you bring up a story and it's funny how we'll go through life. I went through 20 or 25 years of my life drunk every day. Right.
Yeah.
And my first car crash drunk, my girlfriend at the time was in the car and we rolled over and I could have killed her. And she was a great girlfriend, she had stuck by my side through thick and thin for many years. And I treated her like shit.
Yeah.
And I treated everyone like shit in my life. Right. And, I kind of had a God complex, actually. I think, again, because of all my fear of actually attacking life, I had this kind of facade of this God complex. Like I thought I was real hot shit, and I would treat people terribly. And I've told people, until I was 36 years old, I don't think I'd ever driven a car sober in my whole entire life. Mm-hmm. Like from the time I was 16 and got my license till the time I was 36, I was drunk all the time. And I would get pissed off. I would do like the road rage that I would get was over the top. And I'm driving around with with a fifth of Jack Daniels in the car drinking.
Yeah.
And getting in fights with people on the road and driving up on the sidewalks and shit like that, just because I like am crazy and I'm drunk. Right. And I am so lucky that I never killed anyone, like when I look back on it, I am so lucky to be where I am today. And, I say that I attacked or took on all these challenges and succeeded, but there is some luck involved in that. Like each step of the way, even going to school and doing well in school and finding my way to get through school, finding the right people to talk to, like you said, and you had said it previously about how your parents sat you down. My parents didn't go to college, right? Nobody knew anything about that. I had no idea how you even get your foot in the door. And it was kind of like, okay, well, I'd heard you could go to community college and then go to the next place. And that's what I did. I went to community college, and thankfully found the right counselor. That was the first thing I had to learn how to do, is ask questions, right?
Yeah.
Go find the people who know how to do what you're trying to do and ask them a question, and then just listen to them and do it the way they're saying to do it. And that was really a challenge for me. And I think it's the skill that I acquired at that time that I still use to this day. And that's how I'm in this position with people around me who know far more than I do about what I'm doing. And I'm thankful every day that I have picked up new skills, but I also have the opportunity to go ask people how to do something, knowing full well they know how to do it, and just follow the directions and do it, right?
Yeah.
But the amount of stuff we'll do when we're drinking and drugging and stuff like that, and let life kind of pass us by and then look back, it's crazy.
Yeah. I think in this profession as well, like, addiction is one of those things that it's a little bit taboo to talk about, just because people have, I think, preconceptions or notions about what that word even means, or sometimes people don't necessarily want to acknowledge their behavior or their vices that might have become an addiction. Like, for me, I don't stand on the soapbox. Like, I don't preach sobriety. Like, I don't tell people what to do, but if people want to talk about it, I'm pretty open in terms of my past experience. And if they want advice, like, I'm happy to give advice. I think kind of similar to you in terms of talking about fear, like, what it was rooted in for me as well was like insecurity. And like, I was not as self-assured back then as I am now. And so it helped me feel like I was able to get out of my shell. But also, I've heard people talk about alcoholism and drugs in particular, and say that like addiction and reliance on alcohol or drugs is also like a form of escapism. So I think for me, it was, I guess, escaping from myself, in the sense that I was just this very shy, introverted kid, and it allowed me to not be that. But also I hadn't figured out how to be like confident and self-assured when I wasn't drinking. And it just, it helped me feel like, kind of like I was stepping outside of myself, and like I was a different version of myself. And so for me, like, when I finally stopped drinking, that also gave me the ability to be more introspective and look inward and figure out, okay, now how can I become the best version of myself? And kind of getting back to your point about taking on challenges and accepting challenges, and moving forward in the face of fear. I think it was like when I got to that point where I stopped drinking and then I got more introspective, like it was hard to kind of face some of those fears head on, but it was also like exhilarating, because every time I did something like that, I felt like it helped me get more and more and more outside of my comfort zone and get uncomfortable. And like the lessons I learned from getting outside of my comfort zone and facing those fears are some of the biggest and best lessons that I've learned throughout my life. Like, I remember in 2014, and just to kind of preface this, like the Trial Lawyers College in Wyoming, Jerry Spence's Trial Lawyers College, like there's been a schism in the Trial Lawyers College and things have gone on. But at that time in 2014, it was just like Jerry Spence's Trial Lawyers College in Wyoming. And I was thinking, like, what can I do to become a better attorney, a better person, a better trial attorney? And a lot of people were talking about like the 3-week Trial Lawyers College in Wyoming. So I applied, and luckily enough, I got in it was a July 2014 session. But like for me, that was a big step to get outside of my comfort zone, because it's like I'm standing up in front of a group of my peers every single day and, talking to them, or doing a psychodrama, which, that's a whole another aside, but it's basically like there's a licensed therapist or social worker, et cetera, that's basically helping people resolve trauma kind of through role play. So it's called a psychodrama. But like us as the attorneys in our small group, like we all went through a psychodrama where we did our own personal psychodramas in front of everybody else, right? So like doing that like got me outside of my comfort zone. Like I had to, stand up on a picnic table in front of like the entire group and like do things. And so like for me, that was a big challenge. But when I stopped drinking, I finally got the clarity of like, okay, like I need to do these things to push myself out of my comfort zone, because that's how I'm going to become more self-assured, more confident, et cetera. And so that's one of the biggest benefits and biggest boons I got from not drinking, is being able to see myself a lot more clearly and being able to challenge myself and push myself out of my comfort zone. And like every time I did it, like the rewards were exponential.
Right. And for me, I think there was, for me to recognize that I have a fear of something means I want to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, if it never is crossing my mind as something I want to do, I'd probably never think about the fact that I'm scared to do it. So
yeah.
I've learned that a lot of times when I realize I'm having a fear of something, it's something that I, first of all, want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, I think some of that kind of introspective thinking, I've learned that it's something that if I don't attempt to do it, I'm not going to die happy, right?
Yeah.
Like in the end of my life, I'm going to look back and think and have regrets about something I didn't try to do, right? And like I was a pretty shy kid and had a lot of stage fright, was scared of talking, being in groups of people, talking in groups of people. And, one step at a time, I'm still scared of it, but I love it. And it's like you're saying that when I recognize that I have a fear of something, it's almost exhilarating to me to think, okay, I'm going to go do that. Like I'm going to make myself do that thing then. Right. And those things have been the most rewarding experiences for me. And they've provided me opportunities to do things that I love. And that even though I was fearful of the steps to get there, I now realize that it's gotten me to a place to be able to do things that I really enjoy, I really love, and use skills that I have that other people don't have, or that other people can't overcome the hurdles to get to and be allowed to use. So, and I was talking to someone recently about, how this comes out in law and in law school. And first of all, one thing you mentioned was the college drinking society. I saw that more prevalent than anywhere at law school, right? And it was going to law school most of the people there are 27, 28 years old. And by the time I got there, I think I was 37 or whatever, and had kind of stopped partying. And watching it from the outside, it was astounding to me how, the partying and the binging, a lot, just a ton of going all week hard and then getting to that weekend and just getting in a situation where but I think that also there is a lot of fear in law school, and a lot of people are doing some of that stuff to deal with some of that fear. And, and some of the fear of law school is law school related, and some of the fear of law school is what's to come related, right? Like, okay, well, what happens after law school, and how am I going to do this career, and how am I going to, pass the finals? How am I going to do the career when I get there? Am I going to pass the bar? And I think that it's just, I've learned, man, you just have to jump in and do it
for sure.
And then come out the other end and say, well, it didn't kill me, right? Jump in and do it.
I think what we do also is like plaintiff personal injury attorneys, trial attorneys. It's a very type A profession. And so I think with that being said, the word fear itself, like there's a lot of stigma around the word fear, like, oh, you shouldn't be afraid, like, oh, the real man's not afraid, or fear is bullshit, it's all in your mind, like whatever. And I think there's nothing wrong with like acknowledging that we have a fear around something or an anxiety around something. It's just kind of how you deal with it or what you do in the face of it. Like maybe there are people out there who, no matter what they're doing, And especially if they've been doing it long enough, there's like no butterflies in the stomach or anything like that. But like just because you have butterflies in the stomach or a little bit of nerves or something like that, I don't think it makes anyone like lesser of a trial attorney or lesser of a this profession or lesser of that profession. But I think society has kind of turned fear into a dirty word. I think it's all about kind of what you do in the face of that fear, so to speak, because similar to what you said about you, like if I'm scared about something or if I have fear about something, that's also an indication like that's something I should be doing. And I'm not talking about like, oh, like I'm gonna go like base jumping off a cliff or something like that. But like, you know, for me, even like going to the trial lawyers college, going to these other seminars where like I'm in a group of my peers and I'm standing up and doing things in front of them, like putting myself in uncomfortable positions where I know like this is a skill set that I haven't necessarily mastered yet, but I want to master. And this is how I have to go about mastering it. Like you have to take those lumps, you have to take those punches. And so to me, like that's the motivating part is like, yeah, when like I identify that stuff, because like every time I've done something that I had nerves or fear or trepidation about, again, like the rewards and the benefits have been exponential. And so like, even to this day, I'm still trying to do things that push myself outside of my comfort zone. And how can I progress even further from where I am now? And I have to figure out ways that I can do that, because I think for all of us, like as humans, that's the way that we maximize our potential. Like they say, nothing ever grows in a comfort zone, you know? And so I tell people like there's a comfort zone, because this is something I learned from someone else. It's like there's a comfort zone, and then outside of the comfort zone is like the stretch zone where like you feel like you're really stretching yourself. And then outside of that is the die zone where you feel like it might be something where here in your comfort zone, you're like, man, if I did this in the die zone, like I don't know what, like I would literally die. Like that's how you build it up in your mind. But like the more you stretch a little bit more into that stretch zone and you become more comfortable, you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then you get to that die zone, and like something that seemed like insane at that point is like, it's just like getting into like a pool of warm water. Like it just feels natural. It feels good. Like it feels relaxing. And like, that's the point that, and like the things that I do that I'm passionate about or that I'm trying to get better at, that's like the level of mastery that I strive for, is that like this just feels like completely natural. It doesn't feel like I'm doing anything out of the ordinary. Like, and the only way to get to that point is like those other steps that lead up to that point. Like you have to keep challenging yourself and challenging yourself and challenging and stretching more and more and more. And then you get to a point where it's just like, this feels easy, you know? And so I think, because like even today, like I still might be in situations where like I get a little bit of nerves or I get a little bit of butterflies, but the fact that I think I've done so many things to push myself out of my comfort zone, it's like even when I feel those little bit of nerves and like in talking about coping mechanisms, it's like now I have more of a witness mentality, whereas before I would get like so in my head because I'm a perfectionist, and I think you've mentioned that as well. Like I'm in my head and I'm like constantly judging myself. Like, did I say that right? Could I have said that better? Should I have responded differently, et cetera? And I would get so caught up in my mind that I would start spiraling. But now, like, I have more of a witness mentality where it's like, I take a step back and it's like I'm watching myself experiencing these emotions. And I'm like, okay, I'm experiencing this now. I know it's going to pass. It's not going to last forever. I'm identifying it. So I can be like, oh, I'm experiencing a little bit of nervousness, but not like I am nervous, because whatever I can do to create separation between what I'm feeling. So I think a lot of people, like us as humans, we tend to just identify with our emotions. Like I'm angry, I'm upset, like I'm unhappy, but it's like, that's like saying I'm a shoe. Like you're not a shoe. You're a person. You're not your emotions. You might be a person who's experiencing an emotion. And so for me, again, in terms of coping mechanisms, one of the best things that I found is to have a witness mentality. And it's almost like I'm watching myself on a movie screen, and like I see myself experiencing an emotion. And of course, I'm still subject to like the vagaries of emotions, especially if something happens and I have like a snap reaction. But having more of that witness mentality where now I'm taking a step back, that's also helped me cope with nerves, anxiety, fear, et cetera. Because, you know, they say fear is like fear of the unknown, right? And so like anxiety is like fear of something that's going to happen in the future. And then fear itself might be fear of something that's actually happening in the present. Like if a tiger were to just run in here, we'd all be afraid all of a sudden. But a lot of times with us as humans, it's more anxiety. Like we're thinking about stuff in the future, or we're dwelling on stuff that happened in the past, which makes us depressed. So the more like I can stay present and then realize like this is some future thing that's going to happen in the future, the better prepared I am, the more confident I'm going to feel when that moment arrives in the future. So for me, there's a lot that comes along with feeling prepared and practicing. And like if it's a voir dire, opening statement, closing up, practice. So now when I get up, it just feels natural. And I think in our profession, it's one of the things that a lot of attorneys don't do, even trial attorneys, is practice. But a lot of times anxiety also comes from feeling unprepared. But the more practice you feel, the more you're going to prepare in the moment. So then the less anxiety you're going to have. So those are kind of, some of the coping mechanisms that I've found help me. But I'm curious, like for you, what coping mechanisms have you found to deal with fear or anxiety or nerves?
Well, I really like this witness mentality, right? That's a tool that I really like that. I mean, it's like, I guess for me, I've kind of white knuckled through it more.
Yeah.
Right. But at the same time, have learned from my past experiences that I'm going to get through this and just kind of gone at it. Right. But, and I still do get nervous, when I stand in front of a group of people and start talking for a couple minutes, but I can remember when it was debilitating.
Yeah.
I can remember in law school making myself do like moot court or mock trial or whatever to make myself do those things and being just scared shitless of it. And I had made myself do the criminal law clinic at the Marin Public Defender's Office specifically because they would let us argue motions. And in fact, they would let us take trials if one came along while we were there. And I thought to myself, okay, like I'm going to go in there and I'm going to get some motions and I'm going to do this thing in front of in a court, in front of people, in front of a judge. And I remember the first time I had a motion to suppress and just being like outside of my, like kind of just had no idea what was going on, kind of in a fog, just being scared.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't even remember what I said or anything else, but I do remember the judge saying to me a couple of times, like, "Oh, that's not, kind of that's inappropriate, or you can't make that argument or whatever." and that was my biggest fear. And here it is, like feeling like a jackass and getting all warm and thinking everyone's looking at me.
Yeah.
I mean, and that feeling, you almost feel like you're gonna like pee yourself or something. You know what I'm saying? And I got through it, right?
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, well, I got through it, so I'll do another motion to suppress. And each time I was less and less scared of the motion to suppress. And then at some point at the public defender's office, I could pick up a case and run a motion to suppress on it, just read the report, run the motion to suppress. And there was no fear associated with it. It was just natural to me, right? And that's what you're talking about. Like, the more you do it, the more you feel natural. But even then, now it's time to run a pitches motion, and it's my first pitches motion. And oh, what am I? How's it going to come down on me now? Well, that's life for me, right? If I'm comfortable, then that means I've acquired that skill, and it's when it's a new skill that I'm trying to acquire that I still have the fear. And for you, for me, I agree with you that it's all about preparing myself. I don't practice as much out loud because I have found, and I've heard, and I've found that the more I practice it out loud, the more practiced it sounds, right? But I do write it out a lot. I write it out a lot, and I edit it a lot, and then I visualize it a lot. I visualize it and tailor every single word. And then cobble it up a little bit more and in my head, just going over and over and over it in my head. And then when I get there, I am able to feel confident. It's like, my parents always told me how good I was at memorizing scripts and things like that when I was a kid. And it's kind of like that for me. Yeah. Once I've done it over and over in my head enough times, then I can walk in the room and I know this shit, right? I know, and I can improvise. I know the shit and I can improvise, and I'm good at both of those things. And so I still stand up in front of a group of people and think one of them's going to think I'm ugly, or I'm a jackass, or I'm funny looking, or I'm going to fall down. You know, I have those fears where I'm nervous that something's going to go wrong. Then I open my mouth, start talking, and usually it goes away pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
But I think that this witness mentality idea, where you're kind of removing yourself from the emotion, is a great tool to try to look at, use to look at it with.
Yeah. I mean, for me, another thing that really helped was just kind of understanding the neuroscience of the brain with respect to emotion. So I read this book probably like over 10 years ago at this point called Emotions Revealed. I think the last name of the author is Ekman. But that book talks about like why we have certain debilitating fears in like modern day society. Because for a long time, the number one fear people had was public speaking, even ahead of death. And so one of the things that he talks about and posits in the book is like, if you bomb in a speech, there are no real repercussions, like especially life or death repercussions. So he's like, why would we have such a debilitating fear around public speaking when the stakes are so low? And so one of the things that he posited was that these emotional reactions might actually be tied to like ancient emotions that where the stakes were life and death. So for example, like, let's say you have a fear of public speaking in front of your peers because you think you're going to bomb, then they're going to like, joke about you, or you'll become the outcast in your peer group or whatever because you failed at this speech. So you'll be effectively like ostracized. But in like our whatever ancestors, like our Paleolithic ancestors or whatever time period it is, we were living in tribes, right? And so if you did something that ran afoul of your tribe and they excommunicated you, it might have actually meant life and death, because now you don't have access to food. You don't have access to tribal protection. Like you're out here literally alone, like on the plains, because you've been excommunicated from your tribe. So it is life and death. So like he kind of draws a line between what was going on here in terms of our neuroscience and our brain's development and like why we have this fear. Like back here, it made sense. You don't want to get excommunicated from the tribe because now you're out here in a harsh world on your own. Versus like when you're with your tribe, we're hunting and gathering together, we're communal, we can protect each other, et cetera. So like that same fear of like excommunication from your tribe, there's an attenuated line to this fear that we have of public speaking, because you feel like now I'm gonna get ostracized from my tribe. So like to me, that was also kind of like an aha moment, because I'm like, this makes sense. But just like understanding the neuroscience of how the brain works and why we have some of these triggers also gives you more information to be like, okay, at least I understand why I might have this trigger. So now I can recognize it more when it comes up. I can recognize what this fear is rooted in. And it goes back to that witness mentality of like, this is very low stakes. Like if I bomb this speech in front of my peers, so what? Yeah, they might laugh and joke about it for a day or two, and then it's like out of the news cycle, so to speak. But like everything that we do in today's modern day and age is like so low stakes compared to some of the fears that we have about them that it doesn't even make sense. But a lot of like just the trigger itself is rooted in like that, like the reptile brain that was like the first part of our brain to develop, like the amygdala, right? Versus then we develop like the prefrontal cortex on top of that reptile brain. But a lot of these fears that we have date back to like the reptilian brain before it even became like the modern day brain that we have today, where we have more discernment and consciousness, et cetera. And so that's another thing is like you have this like small area of the brain that's rooted in like life or death times that's still triggering your emotions today and dictating what you do today. So just having like more knowledge about the brain and how the brain works, to me, is something that's also been liberating in terms of like allowing me to feel like I have more control over my emotions.
I think that also, we are the warrior type in this profession, and I think we have an ego, right? And I think I've had an ego problem in my life. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of my fear was based on that people are going to see that it's a facade. Like the ego that I have is a facade. If I get up here in front of these people, the show's going to be over, right? And so I think I had to get a lot of humility, first of all, and learn to, first of all, laugh at myself and let people make jokes of me, and learn that I had to accept that I'm not perfect, and I can try to be perfect, but I'm not perfect. Yeah. And I think the ego that I had was a complete facade, but I wanted to have it. And I think, like I said, we're like the warrior type, the people that'll go in and fight and everything. And so we have an ego that we have to protect. And I think some of the fear comes from that. And then, bringing it back to the law school thing, I think that law school really feeds into that mentality, right? Mm-hmm. This real competitive, it's all about being the best, number one in the class, and, and so you start to have this fear when you're not number one in the class, or you're not in the top 25 percentile, or I'm in the 20th percentile, but I might fall out of the 20th percentile I think some of the fear is based on competition and ego and things that are bred into this industry. And you also talked about, how the kind of type A, scared to admit the fear and stuff. But I think that that's the problem with fear in this industry, is that you're putting on this facade and you won't admit your own fears and things like that. Mm-hmm. And unbeknownst to the people that you're working with, you're too scared to go in court and go to trial for them.
Yeah.
Right. And the problem in this case is the problem in this career is that you shouldn't be touching a case that you're not willing to go into trial for, really. Now, sure, we pick up cases and we think they're a good case, and then as we're working them up or whatever, we realize they're not as strong as we thought. But any time that you take a case on and you take a client on, then you should be prepared to go the distance with the fight.
Yeah.
And if 100%. You're not a person that can do that, first of all, you can't admit it.
Yeah.
Right. And secondly, you got to figure out a way to make that case go away without going to trial. If you can't overcome that fear. And I think that that's one of the issues with exactly what you're talking about, people that won't admit their fears because they have to keep the facade up, but also it can affect the client negatively because that same person will do what they have to do to get rid of that case without going to trial on it. And so you got to be, it's a concern in the industry, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the ego as well, again, and part of like the attachment to the ego. So I think my take kind of is like the ego also lives in the comfort zone. And the reason why we're so attached to our ego a lot of the times is because it keeps us comfortable. Like we have this conception of ourselves, or like, I'm this person, I live here in this like small circle, and everything outside of that is not for me, or it's not useful, or whatever. But the reason we feel that way is because like there's things that challenge our ego. And then it's like, because like society is a mirror, like life is a mirror, like it holds a mirror up to us all the time. Sometimes people don't like what they see, and therefore they just like retreat back. But like when that mirror gets held up to you, sometimes it's also very sobering. It's like, kind of like what you said, you're like, I realized I had a God complex, or, I realized I think I know everything, or I realized, I have this characteristic that's very attached to my ego, but I don't know who I am if I'm not this person. Like, again, when I was growing up, I was super shy, super introvert. Like if I had just gone through life and then like every time there was an opportunity for me to step outside of my comfort zone, I was just like, oh, that's not me. Oh, I'm too shy, or I'm not that person. Like I wouldn't be here today. And so, but again, I couldn't really get that clarity until I stopped drinking. But then it just allowed me to become so much more of like a multifaceted, like multifarious person, because I was able to kind of start challenging my ego and stepping outside of myself. And it's just been like a huge boon for me, I think, personally. So like in terms of advice that I would give to people, whatever you can do to kind of to challenge your own ego, to step outside of yourself, like whatever that is, like I encourage people to figure that out and do it. Because I think the longer we live in this comfort zone with our ego inside of this comfort zone and say, well, I'm just this is just who I am, you're really limiting yourself. And I think it's a detriment to society as a whole, because I think the world would be a much better place if we all figured out like how to be the best, most like brightest, like shining star, like version of ourselves. Like that's how we uplift society as a whole as well. And so that's why I encourage, like, whatever it is, like if you figure out like, okay, how can I challenge myself to get outside of my comfort zone and like do something different? And oftentimes you find once you take that first step, it's not as scary as you thought. Like that's been my experience a lot of times. It's like this thing that I built up in my mind that's just like, oh man, how am I going to do this? But I just take the step and, you know, force myself to do it. And then once I cross that finish line, I'm like, that wasn't so bad. So like for people to just figure out how to challenge who they are and step outside of that and start taking steps to kind of dismantle that ego in whatever way you can. Like there's, you know, people have different ways that they recommend doing that. But I think it's just challenging yourself in a way that you wouldn't normally challenge yourself because you're comfortable where you are.
And I think you're right. It's taking that, you know, that first step, and I've seen it so many times. Taking that first step opens a door to endless possibilities.
Yeah.
Basically, right? And when people do that and they realize, oh, it's almost like you realize what you've been missing out on in life, right? But I also see people a lot living in their bubble, in their comfort zone. And I used to be the kind of person that I wanted to push them out of that comfort zone, right? But then I've learned since then that I don't want to do that, but I feel sorry for them. I sometimes feel sorry for those people.
Yeah.
And I hope you can one day find your way out of that comfort zone, right? Because I can tell you want more than that, but the fear is holding you up. But, you know, you can't force a person. But I do know from experience that if they're lucky, they'll get to a point where they have to step out of that comfort zone, right? They can't live with themselves without stepping out of that comfort zone. And then they'll find that, man, there's so much out there that you would have missed, like you're saying. Yeah. You know, if you hadn't discovered these things and later on you look back, you would have missed out on a lot of it, right?
Yeah. So if you were talking to somebody who's kind of, you know, been in the midst of what you were dealing with at its peak or just coming out of it, what advice would you give to that person?
Yeah, I think the number one advice for a person who really thinks they're ready to stop is go ask for help, right? Go ask someone who knows about this for help and then take the direction. Yeah. And, you know, I don't really push AA and stuff like that, but it really helped me in the beginning. I don't really participate real actively in the program anymore, but it really helped me, right? Because it was a room full of people who had somehow figured out how to be successful in doing what I was trying to do. Yeah. And it was a bunch of different personalities. And if this personality wasn't working right for me, I could, you know, kind of try to work with it. And it was a place to go tell my story to people who understood what I was talking about and get some kind of comfort in that and then get some direction. And if I followed the direction, then the next day I would be able to come back to one of those meetings, right? Yeah. And so for some period of time, a month or maybe 3 months, I did go to those meetings every day. And each day that passed, I got more and more scared of going back the other way. And so I was committed, okay, I'll keep going to these things and do it, right? And I did ask people for direction, and I did ask people for help or ask people to listen to me, talk to them about how I was feeling and my fears and things of that nature, right? And then at some point, I decided, hey, I need to do these things that I've always wanted to do. And then what I realized about myself is if my life wasn't better now than it was when I was drinking, then I'd go back to drinking, right? Yeah. And so every day of my life, I kind of wake up consciously, first of all, being very grateful for where I am, but also thinking about how do I continue to progress in my life
Mm-hmm.
to get further away from that misery
Mm-hmm.
and to get closer to ultimate happiness, right?
Yeah.
And some days I fail at that. Some days you fail at that, right? At the end of the day, you didn't get closer to happiness. In fact, you're miserable. And then you have to wake up the next day and still realize that the misery you had yesterday was nothing compared to that misery I was in back there, right?
Yeah.
You just start over and keep going. But I think the most important thing really is being open to taking direction and trying to just do the way someone who has been successful tells you to do it.
I agree with that. I mean, you said a couple of things, like gratitude is really important. Like I wake up every single day, and before I get out of bed and put my feet on the floor, I say a prayer of gratitude just for where I am, all the people who have supported me, which, to your point about support, I think for an endeavor, like if somebody's really in the throes of addiction and they want to get sober, support is super important. Like I remember that same year, 2010, when I stopped drinking, but earlier on, I was doing individual and group counseling for alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I remember the woman leading the group, her name was, I think, Chan's Boylini or Shan's Boylini. Shout out to Shan's if she's still out there, because those people are really they're doing the Lord's work, in my opinion. Like they're doing God's work. Like people who are helping people with addiction issues, they're doing God's work. And like she was my group counselor and my one-on-one counselor, and I was still doing that counseling when I came back from Vegas that September. And I remember, like, I told her what happened and I talked to her about it. And she's like, first of all, thank God you're alive, because it sounds like you were on the verge of alcohol poisoning, which could be fatal. And then, second of all, it sounds like you hit your rock bottom. And for most people to actually make lasting change, they have to hit rock bottom. And she was explaining that the issue is, for a lot of people, because they have friends and family members who form a safety net, they never really hit rock bottom, and then they're never really spurred to actual change. So she's like, if rock bottom is here, their safety net is here. So they're always falling short of actually hitting rock bottom. And therefore, it's very difficult for people in that situation to actually make lasting change. She's like, it sounds like for you, you hit your version of rock bottom and hopefully it sticks, which it did. But she was a great support for me at that time, just being able to like talk about these things and her to explain to me the different types of like alcoholism and drinking and the effect on the body and et cetera. So I think having a support system that you can find, that you can trust, is imperative, because I think in any endeavor in life, like we don't go through life alone, even though it might feel lonely at times. Like life is a team sport. And so for something like that, like serious addiction, I think the more people you can get on your team and the more support you can get, the better, because it's very difficult to do it alone. So, I mean, I echo that, like having gratitude every single day, finding the right support system. And I think in terms of like actually breaking that habit, like there's literature out there, like you could read the book, The Power of Habit, or Atomic Habits, but they talk about how oftentimes you have to replace like one habit with a different one. So I think, whether you buy into that, it's like that whatever drinking was for you and like what you were getting out of it and why you were doing it, you have to kind of displace that into something else. And so like, I remember reading something or hearing something where somebody was like, yeah, like you don't necessarily like replace the drinking habit with something else, but you have to figure out why you were drinking or doing whatever it was, like a drug or something like that. You have to figure out why you were doing it, and then figure out something else that kind of gives you that same release or feeling or resolve that you were getting from the drinking. And so like for me, if the drinking was about like escapism, once I stopped, I had to figure out some other way to kind of maybe have that same feeling where I could be like, okay, I'm feeling this way. How can I change my state and like get away from this feeling? So like, oh, it was a bad day, let me have a drink. Well, if the idea is escapism and I want to figure out what to do about this emotion that I'm feeling from having a bad day, maybe now, like if I go to the gym it gives me that same feeling. Or if I pick up something new, like now I'm taking boxing lessons, or I'm doing MMA, or I'm taking a cooking class, like I'm finding something that's not debilitating on me, but it's giving me the same feeling or the same resolve that I used to get from this thing that I want to stop doing. So I think that'd be my other piece of advice for other people who are out there that are like dealing with addiction issues, is also to try to figure out like the underlying root cause of what it is, like why you're really doing this, what's driving you to do it. And is there something else you could be doing that's healthier, but is giving you the same resolve that you were getting when you would go and drink this bottle or do this drug or whatever.
And I think that's exactly right. For me, it was, I was drinking all day, every day. So I had to find something to replace drinking all day, every day, right? And it could have been anything.
Yeah.
And at first it wasn't. At first it was playing tennis, going to the beach, for the first half a year, it wasn't anything really productive, but it was filling the day with good things, right? And then it became doing something with my life towards bettering myself and helping people, but also, I never ran more than when I was first getting sober. And then I incorporated running and mountain biking and tennis and, eating tasty foods, right?
Yeah.
Like eating foods that I love. I incorporated all that stuff in, and sure, I'm not trying to get the same feeling I had when I was drinking, because I actually felt like shit, but I'm trying to fill the same void sometimes. And so that I got to have something that addresses that.
Yeah.
And tried to make it healthy things that address that. But also it's okay to have something that isn't healthy, as long as it's not hurting you or killing anyone. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's under control. He said one other interesting thing. The support group. And I think that's why I wanted to kind of have this conversation, is that just to, if there are people out there in law school or in the career or whatever, I want to make myself available to those people. Anyone, I try to be available to anyone who's struggling through these kind of challenges. If they ever need to talk to somebody, it's a scary process, especially when you're in this career. This career, there is a stigma with it, and there is your license, and people worried about what could happen and stuff like that. And I totally understand that. So, and because when I first was doing it, I didn't have a support group, right?
Yeah.
Everyone was gone by that point. And luckily, my mother came back into my life after I had gotten sober. My mom stuck by me all the way through, and I wouldn't have. I had screwed everybody over so bad, I wouldn't have. But, that was kind of my one support person. But a lot of times you get to that rock bottom and there is no support group left. So, I want to be available to people for that.
I second that. I mean, you preface this by saying, obviously, we're not, any type of mental health professionals or licensed therapists or anything like that. But for anyone out there who's just looking for somebody to talk to or to be a sounding board for any of these types of issues, make myself readily available if they, seek me out or try to find me, because I'm happy to share about my experiences and happy to dispense whatever advice like I've been able to glean on this journey through life. Because like you said, I think sometimes people are hesitant to reach out about these types of issues, or there is a stigma attached to them, so they don't feel like there might be a safe place for them to go discuss these things. So to the extent like you can be that safe space, or I can be that safe space, like I wholeheartedly encourage people to reach out.
And I will say to that, it doesn't mean anyone who has ever called me has always liked what I had to say.
Yeah.
I've told a number of people, I don't think you're ready yet.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that time and again with kind of, the addict behavior, or the trying to manipulate, the manipulative behavior, and trying to kind of establish that relationship. And so I'm always available to try to help somebody who's trying to help themselves,
Before we wrap up, any final closing thoughts, any final words of advice for anyone, not just on addiction, but it could be fear, it could be anxiety, or anything else we've covered today?
Well, I think that I kind of touched on it, and that is, in living life, always consider what you're going to look back on with regret, right? And what things you may look back on and think you missed out on. And when you're held up from doing something that you think you may want to do, you have to ask yourself that question, like, how important is it to me? And if I don't attempt it and I look back on life, am I going to feel like a failure? Am I going to feel like I missed out on something? Is that a joy that I would have had in my life if I would have attempted it? And I live life that way, and I think I'm halfway through life. I'm at midlife, right?
Yeah.
And so I live life thinking, when I get to the end, are there things that I'm going to look back and wish I would have done? And I try to do those things. And I think everyone should.
Yeah, I agree. I would also say, don't hold on so tightly to who you think you are. That's my advice to not you, but just the audience out there. Like, don't be so wedded to who you think you are. Don't hold on so tightly to this version of yourself you think you are, because it's going to be holding you back from becoming an even greater, better, more amazing version of yourself. So I think with all that being said, we can close this one out. Thank you for your time, Daniel. I appreciate it as always.
Thank you. Had a great time.
Yeah, me too.
This podcast is brought to you by Adamson Ahdoot, LLP. Hosted by Christopher Adamson. Produced by Lauren Henning and Chris Weigen. If you have thoughts or suggestions, email us at itspersonal@aa.law. The views, opinions, and statements expressed by guests on this podcast represent the personal perspectives of the individual speakers and do not constitute official positions of Adamson Ahdoot, LLP, or its attorneys, staff, or affiliates. Nothing discussed creates an attorney-client relationship, and the content is provided for general informational and educational purposes only. Always consult with a qualified attorney about your specific circumstances.